Welcome to the Cyber Call, the podcast by Ride at Boom for managed service providers looking to stay ahead in an ever-changing world of cybersecurity. Each week, we dive into the latest threats, trends, and real-world strategies to help MSPs protect their clients and grow their businesses. Let's build a safer, stronger community together.
All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome and happy Monday to you all. Apologies for the delay. Restream is giving us a bit of a challenge today and can only allow 2 people to come into the stream. I can hear the other co-hosts trying to join, and unfortunately, they can't. So it's going to be me and VJ today, kind of getting into this. Chip, Phyllis, and Bob, I apologize if you guys are listening. And if for some reason I can get you in, I absolutely will do so. All right. So VJ, we're going to start off with a little bit of banter here. One of the things that I know I wanted to ask you about was, and Chip brought this up, let me just share my screen, is, bear with me here. I don't know if you're following this, but let's do this. The big drift hack. Have you seen this one, VJ? Where threat actors have been trying to get into these platforms for, just, it looks like, well executed, created again, kind of this ruse that they were this organization that had legitimate reason to do crypto exchange, invited them to a conference. But it goes really hand in hand with what we're going to talk to today. I guess the sophistication, if you will, of these attacks in terms of the social engineering. It's really taking at a whole new level, as we're going to talk about when we get into the whole Axios. But what's your take on this?
Yeah, it's a little more intimate setting than you're used to, Andrew. Just the 2 of us.
That's okay.
Yeah. No, actually, my previous company, Mandiant, in fact, blogged about this. They've been tracking these actors for a while now. And I know people that run exchanges, crypto exchanges, CISOs of crypto exchanges, and they've been dealing with this for a while, all right? And so I think for us, it should not come as a surprise that this is what is going on. So I think what happened with Axios and the drift hack and all of them are not surprises, right? The North Korean actors have been infiltrating into companies as legitimate employees, right, just to make money for a long time now, right, over 3 years. So the fact that they've set up profiles, that set up fake profiles, and are trying to make money off scams or just legitimate business opportunities, I think should not be a surprise. So for me, we've been dealing with supply chain attacks for a long time, right? I was intimately involved with, the SolarWinds hack from over 10 years ago. So pretty familiar with it, right? So none of this should come as a surprise. I think, the good thing is it was caught in 3 hours, right? If you look at the Axios one. So I think that is an upside to how we're dealing with these threat actors. The fact that we have tools now, and then there are people on the research side looking into compromises of these libraries and so on, right, and packages. And so I think there is a silver lining to all of this, right? I think we're just kind of improving how it is that we're detecting these threat actors. But the fact that it has happened and supply chain compromises have happened, I think that should not come as a surprise. Right?
No, and not at all. I agree with you. I just they're certainly being very deliberate. This is more than just a phishing scheme, right? As we're going to talk about momentarily with Axios, it was a whole company there that was created, profiles and teams. And so that's really what I wanted to kind of talk about, is the diligence of the attack is really, yes, we have this mass proliferation of phishing as a service and token hijacking. That's one thing, but these are at a completely different level in terms of.
I think we're sort of just at the beginning of it, right? So I mean, North Korean actors, obviously they have the resources to do it. They're pretty well organized, right? So the fact that they can organize themselves into creating these profiles and companies, and what we learned over the weekend, is Axios, and the developer of Axios was not the only guy that was targeted. There were a bunch of people, right? Maintainers of pretty large open source software that were all targeted around the same time.
Oh, well, the TeamPCP did 4 of them in a matter of just a few days.
Exactly, right? And just yesterday, there were a lot of other people that spoke up, right? Similar compromises to what happened with Axios, right? So yeah, I mean, I think the way they organize themselves, that we've known for a while. I think I feel like we're sort of in the beginning of things right now, right? There could easily come a time where, rather than you using like human resources to organize and try to gain that trust of developers, of enterprises, I could see them evolving into using AI agents, right, with deepfakes and so on. And when that happens and they're able to do that at scale, I think we're going to have a huge problem there, right? For the industry at large to deal with someone as sophisticated as a North Korean state actor, but having to kind of deal with it at scale, I think is going to be an issue.
Yeah.
Right. So I think we're just at the beginning of these kinds of attacks, and we're just going to be seeing one of them.
Yeah, and to the Bob, just one of our co-hosts chimed in. Bob and team, I'm at a loss. I've reached out to support, and it's definitely a restream issue today, because we were able to get Phyllis in, we were able to get Chip in, but we only get one person in at a time. So
I know Bob is more interesting than me, Andrew, but I think for this one, I'm going to stick around.
Yeah. So, all right. The other thing, I not to get into it in depth, BJ, but I would just love your thoughts. I'm going to show 2 articles real quick. Should be backstage. No, there's no one backstage, miss. If you're listening. You can only see 2 people. Okay. So VJ, this is another thing that I find fascinating, and I'm going to show 2 articles real quick. This is a actually, let me go to the top here so you all can see this. So this is an article that was written in Medium by, I don't know if you ever heard of freelancer.com at all, VJ. But
I have not, no.
He's built an amazing company, and I heard the podcast on it, and what's really fascinating about what he talks about is the similarity to the infrastructure build out of the early internet, AT&T and others, just spending billions and of dollars, and then ultimately, right, Google and the others basically took over their investments. And when you look also at the economics of AI, I mean, these companies are not making money, and he goes into the fact that it's one of these platforms also that's what's really interesting about the platforms, VJ, is you can switch the cost of switching. There's nothing holding you. There's no contract. And I'm just, as somebody that probably is using AI quite a bit, I have for coding, for various detections and things like that. They say history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. Do you see some rhyming here in what's happening? And when you look at the amount of money these companies are borrowing, and this almost, I'm going to use a term that's probably not fair, but almost Ponzi scheme-ish, right? Like with the build outs of the internet, you had, for example, Lucent and Nortel and the fiber networks, hey, buy our stuff and we'll invest in you. Well, we're seeing it all over, right?
Yeah.
Hey, NVIDIA, OpenAI, buy a bunch of our stuff and, we'll invest in your company. And yet everybody's losing money except the big chip manufacturers. So just love your take on this, if you would.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably outside my forte a little bit, but I'll speak to it sort of as user of it, right? 3 years ago, my go-to platform was Gemini. Now it is Claude. I'm sure tomorrow is going to be something else. But yeah, I think the fact that platform like users such as myself are not sticky to these AI platforms is definitely a problem, right? I think what we're also seeing is a lot of the open source platforms, at least open weight platforms, are getting to a point where they're at least competing with the models of yesterday, right? The models of maybe 4 months ago.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you get to a point where maybe you don't need the most cutting edge platform to kind of code, but a model from 4 or 6 months ago is good enough, then what happens, right? How does the industry change, right? I mean, I feel like the Ponzi scheme will just kind of fall apart at that point. Especially, I mean, costs are going down, right? You're going to be able to get the number of tokens you're getting out of these models is, I think the latest model that people were talking about was almost 1 million. So when you're getting that as your output for cents, for me, I find it difficult to figure out how it is that they can scale that, right? How do you make money of it?
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, to me, I'm the beneficiary of all this.
Exactly.
So yeah, right. I mean, both within our platform as well as personally, right? I'm a user. I like what I see, but how they make money of it, that beats me.
Yeah, it's interesting. All right, let's get on into it, Vijay. I'll set the stage here, and maybe I could ask Bob Miller to be my eyes and with everybody in chat there, Bob, because I'm going to be really focused here on Vijay and the questions. But so let me set the stage here, Vijay. You mentioned that it was in very short order. They were able to figure out the Axios situation and whatever. I think you mentioned 3 hours. That said, they still compromised that the code injection, if you will, still got to 600,000 instances, which is not trivial. And you look at a organization that the North Koreans that were sophisticated enough to create an literally a company, a fictitious company, an infrastructure and everything, and and the developer that owned the keys to the kingdom, if you will, also wasn't like he didn't have multi-factor and those types of things. So anyway, I thought, I really wanted somebody on the call that has deep roots in incident response and you came right to mind. So before I start asking you questions, Vijay, for those that may not know you, I wondered if you could give an overview of your background and what you do today.
Sure, yeah. So my name is Vijay Akasapu. I've been in cybersecurity for 25 years. I remember the first incident response engagement was back in 2002 or 2001 with a company called Foundstone, a company started by George Kurtz. I then joined Mandiant as one of the founding employees prior to them having the platform that allowed them to scale their incident response practice, helped build the first EDR in the market. And when Mandiant kind of built out their platform to help scale up IR, I was involved in a number of those investigations. Took that experience. I knew going in that the industry at large needed a platform that basically combined what you got with an EDR with a full enterprise visibility platform with a performance log management on the back end. And so I left Mandiant essentially to start that platform, right? To start that company, right? And I knew going in that I wanted to make sure we built a platform that worked for everybody, not just the large enterprise. Yeah. And so that's my introduction to the MSP world, right? Because the companies that MSPs deal with were the companies that we were targeting. And so it was a good match for us. I felt like every company needs that same level of protection as a large enterprise. And so that's the platform we set out to build, right? So yeah, I'm the CEO of Silerian. We kind of built a platform for the MSPs to make sure they had the same tools as any large enterprise would, right? To deal with issues like we're going to be discussing.
Very cool. You mentioned, so George Kurtz was at the first company you were at too, huh?
Yeah, he was the CEO of Foundstone. He took what we built at Mandiant and then kind of parlayed that into CrowdStrike, right? basically kind of turned it on its head, used what, sort of our indicators of compromise concept and applied it to more real-time telemetry. And then that's what really, and he was cloud first, whereas we were a hardware appliance. And so that's really what kind of began the EDR space.
Yeah, it's crazy the talent you have been around, and obviously yourself, VJ. But it's crazy your background. So again, thanks for joining us. Let's get into some questions here. So as I mentioned, UNC 1069, the North Korean group, didn't exploit a vulnerability. They built an entirely fake company, fake identities, branded a Slack workspace, even fake profiles, LinkedIn channels, you name it. And like I said, the maintainer had 2 FAA on, whether it was phishing resistant or not. I'm not going to get into that. But when you look at this, how does this, this threat, right? This human-centric way organizations need to think about security awareness training and identity verification, for their developers, and even I would argue, maybe their high executive resources, right, VJ? I think you can plug in either or that have high value targets, right, to supply.
Yeah.
How do you think about that? And maybe just a follow-up question: is open source going to have trouble, with all these attacks? I mean, are people going to question it? But let's get to the first piece about the identity-centric social engineering, security awareness training area here.
Yeah, I mean, so we've been doing security awareness training for 20 years, right? I think we've done a fairly decent job of raising people's awareness in general, right? I was in an ER 2 weeks ago, and I, just over the nurse's monitor, there was a sign on, make sure you're aware of phishing and so on. So I don't know how she'd have time to kind of look at email while she's at an ER, but the fact that I saw that in the ER, I think kind of just shows how much progress we've made as an industry in kind of raising people's awareness of just phishing in general. So I think there's definitely some things we've done well with. And I also feel like, there's some level of minimal training that makes sense, right? I kind of give the analogy of a fire department, right? If everybody in an enterprise kind of clicked on the phishing email, you would have, and I've run SOCs, I've built SOCs before, right? So if everybody was clicking on that phishing email, that's the equivalent of every fireman going up trees looking for cats, right? And when a real fire broke out, you're not going to have anybody available. And that's how I see, right? So you want to make sure you're kind of raising the bar some, so people are not clicking on every link that requiring incident response and some analysts to kind of look at what has happened. And so that level of raising that level makes sense. But at the same time, I guess as an industry, the question is, do we need to, given where these threat actors, or given what they've done, do we need to build out a platform that uses AI to kind of build trust over weeks on end with an individual and kind of do that at scale? I think that might be taking it a little far, as just coming from a security awareness standpoint. I think what we need to build out in parallel is sort of the mechanism to, if someone kind of realizes that they've been hacked or clicked on something, at least provide them the means to deal with that, right? Provide them the means to respond to an attack like that. I think, like I said, right, we've raised the bar. And I think, while we were talking previously, there is going to be a time when threat actors do start to leverage AI agents to kind of do this at scale, do it automatically. At that point, how does the security awareness industry kind of raise the bar, right? And I think you can only do so much. There's going to be some diminishing returns at that point. And to your point, I think at that point, you just want to make sure that you're targeting the right personnel versus everybody in the company.
Yeah.
The executives, the main developers, and so on.
What's interesting too, though, and MSPs can probably really feel this, is a lot of times, VJ, the executives are the ones that are the hardest.
Yeah.
Like in terms of wanting to comply, and yet they're the ones that should be arguably the most involved in governance in an organization and wanting to be part of that. Is it the failure of us connecting the dots to the business as MSPs that, getting them, or is it just, as people being aloof and feeling, just poor judges of risk, which we know a lot of people are. I don't think people are maliciously, even executives. I just think people are poor judges of risk and don't think it's going to happen to them.
Yeah. I think there's a human element to it for sure. But at the same time, I think you can also kind of build in defenses to make it more difficult for a single person to, if they were to fall prey to something like that, have an impact, right? Like if you look at the Axios hack, and we do this internally, right? We are a development shop. For us, any pull request you make has to be approved by someone else, right? So you need at least 2 people looking at any code change for it to make it into the main bill.
Yeah.
And that should be a default for all of this, right? For all of your open source, especially high risk open source software, you need to have more than one person be able to kind of make changes, right? Yeah. You need another approver. I think there's some resilience that we need to kind of build into the system that I feel like was lacking, at least with the Axios. And that to me was surprising. The fact that a single hack, hack of a single person could make that difference, right?
That's a really good point. I wish Chip was on here because they built so many. This is something he is very passionate about. Their checks and balances with code, and all right, let me move on here. So with the malicious, the plain. It was if you look at the article, right? There's this, plain crypto.js package that was, seeded 18 hours before the attack as a clean decoy version. VJ deliberately building a registry history to appear legit. The attackers then published 2 backdoors within 39 minutes of each. They got both versions, right, that were available, tagging both with the latest. And then, from there, what does this level of operational planning tell us about the sophistication of the adversary? And does the open source registry ecosystem have any realistic defense?
Yeah, I mean, I think let me address the second part first, right? Microsoft owns GitHub. I feel like they should sort of start to contribute as well, right? There is no reason why Microsoft cannot automatically code, scan every code, right? Especially for programs like Axios that and we our company uses Axios, so I know firsthand the potential impact of something like that, right? And so things like that, right? Have automated scanning, have Microsoft contribute to it, kind of make Copilot available to all of these maintainers, right? Especially large software like this, and kind of have it, any code change, have it scan. And that's what caught the hack in the first place. I think one of the developers had built out this open source tool to scan new software, new packages. And the detection was fairly simple, right? While static code analysis might not have caught it, just given how it was built, it was, you could have figured out, the fact that it had some obfuscated.
And it was typo squatted, right, VJ?
Yeah. I don't think the domain was, right? Okay. The actual domain, the callback domain, I don't think was typo squatted. And I may be wrong, right? I have to look into that. But I mean, it's not unusual for the North Korean actors to do that, right? So I would not be surprised. But yeah, I'd say, as an industry, we could do a lot more. Companies like Microsoft should be involved. They should just make sure Copilot is available to all of these guys. And as a maintainer of software, right, I'm just surprised that they didn't have more than one person be able to contribute and make changes. So that is also something we can kind of improve on, right, as an industry.
Yeah.
And in terms of
go.
I was going to say, in terms of the sophistication of the hack, right? We know the North Koreans are pretty good, right? They've been doing this for a long time now. I've been involved with incident responses where they were the bad guys. I've also been involved in incidents where the North Koreans basically were able to exfiltrate or steal, I think it was $8 million of money, all by just sending emails, right? It's just a business email compromise. There was no hack. There was no compromise of any software. There was no attack on anybody. They just sent an email and they were able to steal that much, right? So the sophistication of these actors kind of varies. I'd put them sort of in the middle of the pack in terms of how sophisticated they are, even though they were able to kind of set up a whole fake profile and all of that. We've dealt with some Chinese state actors that we'd only talk about in like hushed whispers, right? Just given how sophisticated they were. We run into threat actors that were able to compromise entire national infrastructure of countries, right? So when you kind of compare these actors to sort of the sophistication we've seen at Mandiant, I'd say they're in the middle of the pack. Hopefully they're not listening to this and and then get offended and target me, but I'd put them in the middle of the pack, right? Just given.
So since we're talking about nation state actors, Vijay, like obviously this past week or weekend, Iran has said we're going to target these 12 top U.S. organizations. Everything, we're very focused on tech, so the Microsoft, Amazons, Palantirs of the world, and then even banking, J.P. Morgans, etc. Where do you put their sophistication? I mean, I'm sure we're on high alert. All those companies are on high alert. Where have you dealt with them over the years? And where
we have, we have. I just in terms of sophistication, right? I'd put, at least. I mean, I'm talking about sort of my perspective, right? Just given who we've dealt with. So this is kind of going back to my time at Mandiant, Foundstone, as well as iLeader. Definitely the Chinese state actors, number one. I'd put the North Koreans number two and Iranians number three, right, in terms of sophistication, because those are sort of the three primary state actors, at least nation-backed actors that we come across, that are targeting the U.S. companies, right? And so, not that they lack sophistication, it's just that for the most part, we see them mostly target individuals, less so large enterprises, right? So for them to make that pivot, I think is going to be a stretch. I think a lot of it is them talking about stuff, but I think their ability to execute might be a little limited.
You didn't mention Russia in there and GRU. Have their capacity been somewhat diminished or changed with Ukraine, Vijay, over the past few years?
I don't think so. With Russians, so I mean, the GRU absolutely has been involved in a lot of hacks, right? But I would say less so targeting enterprises. When you look at what the Russians have done targeting enterprises, it's mostly been criminal groups versus the state itself, right? And so I think that's the difference. We've seen GRU hack into, for example, Hillary's emails and so on and so forth, right? All of that, they've definitely been involved, but less so like targeting enterprises to make money off them, right? That's been sort of mostly threat actors out of the Russian criminal groups, right?
Yeah. Let's just talk about just the proliferation of the last few weeks. We had TeamPCP that I think is responsible for 4 out of the 5, and now the UNC 1069 on Axios. Google estimated hundreds of thousands. I think the stats are around 600, as I mentioned, 600,000 or so compromises in Axios. So if North Korea intelligence has developed this repeatable, playbook for targeting, open source maintainers, what does it, say in terms of coordinated, responses and could this proliferate over to other areas, other than just open source that we need to be aware of in a supply chain?
Yeah, I think we've kind of outsourced response and sort of coordinating the response to companies like Google for the most part, right? I think CISA does a decent job with the bulletins, but making industries of all types, especially sort of in our MSP world, kind of be aware of what is going on. Having a more coordinated response where people are sent emails from a trusted source, I think that is lacking, right? I've been involved in some investigations where I would get an email, we'd kind of deploy some honeypot infrastructure to catch the bad guys. And we'd get emails from like a Google to tell us, we suspect something is going on in your network, and it would happen to be a honeypot network. But I think that kind of feedback is lacking across the industry, right? So if I was an MSP or a small enterprise, and I was running some compromised software, nobody's going to be informing me, right? I need to make sure I have the tools to be able to scan those IOCs, have that enterprise level visibility to be able to kind of go back in time and look for that. And I think that it's somewhat being disorganized. I'd say I don't think there's any one trusted entity that people can look up to and say, you know what, give me the information, and I'll kind of leverage the information you get me or you give me to be able to scan the enterprise, right? I think it's, especially in the US, I feel like that is definitely lacking.
Yeah.
So I think that's going to be a gap sort of going forward.
So Eric's son said something. He's like, yeah, not very interesting regarding this. They stole creds again, and I hear him, but at the same time, what I think's different about this attack, BJ, is the amount of effort to gain trust.
Yeah.
Before getting the creds. That's the big difference here. This was quote unquote a legitimate. I'm air quoting. This was a legitimate company. We've had conversations, right, about like on Teams calls. Like, that's the, Eric, I know you're listening. I think that's the difference here, is it wasn't just, here's an email, here's a phishing email, hand over your creds. That's the level of sophistication of, I think the gaining people's trust was the big pulling people's guard down, and the effort they did, BJ, to pull down the guard.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that definitely makes a difference. And imagine now, especially with AI, right, kind of doing this at scale, I think that's going to be a problem, right? Yeah, it's not just the domain of the North Korean state actor. It is really anybody being able to leverage an AI agent and, deep fakes and so on to be able to do this at scale. I think that's when it starts to get interesting, is like, how do you coordinate a response at that point? But yeah, I mean, it's going to be a challenge for industry.
Yeah,
it keeps me occupied, so it keeps me with the job, and so I'm kind of grateful for that. But no problem.
Do you think? And I can't remember. We've had this gentleman Sandy Cronenberg on for a few times from NetArcs, who deception, and I forget that there's a new category, right? But deception technology.
Oh yeah.
Do you think that's going to be growing, BJ, in terms of, hey, that's a fake Teams, that's a fake Zoom, that's a fake, having that level of telemetry for deep fake is, again, as an maybe at the enterprise, but as an MSP, is it just like, oh great, here's just another tool? And
I think when it comes to technology, right, the platforms that serve the MSPs are going to have to adapt, right? I think you should not have, from a tooling standpoint, you should make sure that companies, whether it's a large enterprise or a small one, have the same visibility, right? And so that is something we kind of stress on, is whether you're a company of 10 people or a large enterprise of 100,000, enterprise visibility is a requisite for you to be able to detect these kinds of things, right? So if you look at this particular attack, right, it was granted, they sent out some emails, sent out a Slack request, I believe, had the user connect to it was a Teams room, right? But eventually what happened was they had them click on a link that deployed something malicious on their endpoints, right? That level of visibility is, for an EDR to have or for a SIM to have is not difficult, right? And for an MSP to be able to take in that technology and deploy it to their clients is not an expensive proposition, right? I think we have come to a point where sort of having MSPs provide that enterprise level visibility, it doesn't break the bank, right?
Yeah.
And so, I think there's no reason why MSPs should not be able to leverage those platforms and those technologies. You want to make sure you're providing the same level of security as a large enterprise would get. Right?
Yeah.
And so that means, exactly, right, the visibility into your endpoints, to your apps, to your cloud services, to your network. And when you have that, I think it makes detection a cinch, right? It makes it that much more easy for you to kind of go back in time, scan for IOCs, or kind of look back, look forward, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's one of the big things that you hear often when talking to, I was just on the phone last week with Melissa Ventrone, who's one of the great breach attorneys. She spoke at Right of Boom, and VJ, her number one thing is, look, Andrew, so many times, she said far more times than not, we can't give attribution or go back in time because there's no logs.
Yeah.
And so again, it comes back to, I think, again, as an industry, you typically see logging, SIM, quote unquote, but you typically see logging and the kind of visibility that you're talking about, VJ, far more in regulated industry than non-regulated industry, simply because of the compliance nature.
Yep.
And again, the area of opportunity I see for MSPs is really changing their ability to have executive level conversations to tie what this means to the business, to the revenue, to the business outcomes that an organization is trying to achieve. We have to change the way we communicate to get them to see why it matters to the business, and that's incumbent upon us.
Yeah, absolutely. Hacks like this kind of make the industry a little more aware of what is required, and so it's going to move things forward, but it's going to take time, right?
Yeah, we've had a lot of those hacks to move the industry forward, but I think it all comes down to communicating effectively, that a business owner goes, I see how this matters to my revenue. Take Hasbro for a minute right now, right? Who's arguably going to be offline. I don't know if you guys are following this out there, but Hasbro has had to take down systems now. I think they're going to estimate north of 2 weeks, if not more, BJ. Now this is a multi-million-dollar company, and if you could have tied, hey, this is the risk to the revenue, this is the risk to the critical business systems that support that, this is what it means to deliver digital services, and the impact, right, of that revenue to the bottom line, that I think that's where we've got to evolve the conversations. Business leaders don't care about technical jargon, unfortunately.
Yeah, absolutely. Right.
So let's get into it. So Axios runs on 80%. This is staggering, VJ. You even mentioned you run it, and 80% of cloud environments, 100 million downloads a week. It took the team, a fake Teams call, as you mentioned, to get for remote access. The entire NPM ecosystem is built on mass trust.
Mm-hmm.
And individual volunteer maintainers, which goes back to your point, is that a great idea? And not having some types of checks and balances. But in the wake of this, is that trust fundamentally broken? Do we need to change how these models work?
Yeah, absolutely, right. I think, like I said before, you cannot depend on one person. I guess let me answer it in two ways, right? One is you want to make sure you have more than one person be able to make changes, right? I think that's just best practice, right? We do that internally. I would imagine every large enterprise does that. Maintainers of Axios should put that in place, right? There's no reason why they cannot. On the other hand, we're also seeing, especially true of the North Koreans, right? We're also seeing them kind of try to gain employment into enterprises in the first place, right? And so there's no reason why they cannot become contributors of open source software, right? So if you have a North Korean and multiple North Koreans start to, contribute to software like Axios or something that's used globally, then what do you do, right? Then having this, system by which you need more than one person to approve changes is not going to fly, right? Because you're going to have multiple North Korean actors, start to provide development resources. So so is it broken? I think so, but I think the industry still kind of largely runs on open source software at this point. So there's really not much we can do to change it. I think what we can do and I'll speak to it as SI Leader as a company that uses open source software. We have detection in place that makes sure that we're looking for sort of these behavioral IOCs that we oftentimes see in play, right? Like if you look at the Axios hack, when you built out your tooling, when you ran, npm install, it would then download the package, build that, and what that would entail, what that would result in is a connection making, a command and control connection, right? We dogfood our own environment from a detection standpoint. So we're kind of noticing every beacon that goes out of our environment, right? Every network connection, every DNS request, and we look for anomalies, right? And I think the industry kind of has to evolve to that point you cannot depend on the open source software being trusted. If Phyllis was on, she would kind of broach, SBOM. That's a topic I think that's near to her heart. You'd want to demand that of your developers, of the companies, the software companies that you deal with. But beyond that, I think as MSPs, as development shops, you want to make sure you have that visibility so you can detect those command and control callouts or those anomalous network requests, those files being created, right? And I think that's you'd want to do that whether you're a development shop or an enterprise or an MSP.
You bring up some great points, Vijay, that I think the MSPs should hear, and that is, we had Liron Barron, who's the chief product officer at SaaS Alerts, on, who's just literally spends every waking hour understanding AI and how AI is used in code and uses it, very heavily. And one thing he talked about is now that MSPs and or their clients are starting to use AI, right? Mm-hmm. Different ways, various ways. He talked about how it's not uncommon for developers to have a large project they're working on and say, hey, keep running this overnight and accept updates.
Yep.
Right, DJ? And that's an area I think, talk about what goes tremendously wrong there and how maybe MSPs can use that as, conversations like, hey, I get the sense you're developing, custom software. Are you using, AI to do that? Walk me through your process, or, about, do your developers, is there change control? Are they able to, walk away overnight and have, libraries automatically update? Because that's when things go horrifically wrong, correct?
Yeah, absolutely, right. So if you look at, I think why, so even though the exposure was just 3 hours, the reason why there were so many companies that were compromised, or at least, based on the Google report, is a lot of the times people have automated updates, right? There's a new version of Axios. Yeah, I'm going to run some tooling that automatically updates my version, right? And so I think that has to change. I would say it's twofold. One is you'd want to not have that in place, not automatically update to the latest version, right? Maybe give it a couple of days for the scanners and for the researchers to look into updates that are being made, and combine that with the level of visibility you would want to figure out if your software is compromised, right? So I think it's really a combination. And then coming to sort of the AI world, I think what you do if you're a company that is building out software and using AI, you'd want to make sure you have visibility into what the AI is doing, right? The prompts that you're sending, the requests that your AI engine makes, so like all of that is visibility that you'd want. And you're seeing a whole industry kind of come about where that is what they're providing, is that level of visibility, right, on your endpoints, into your AI models. And so, yeah, I would say don't have automated updates. I think this goes sort of, it's different from what we normally recommend, right, when it comes to third-party software and Windows updates and so on. Give it a day or two. Yeah, try to see what the industry has found out about that software, and then update yourself, right? And that's what we do internally as well, just to kind of keep secure.
Yeah, I mean, you're getting 10x the efficiency with these tools, right, Vijay? So maybe just, hey, slow down a minute when it comes to change. Put the guardrails in for change control.
Exactly.
That's really what you're saying here.
Yeah, absolutely, right. Especially if you have an AI model kind of create code automatically. I think you'd want a lot of these. What it does is it creates these change requests, right? Don't rely on the AI to approve the change requests, right? You'd want to kind of have some manual control around that, right? And so I would say I think you'd want to kind of slow down that a little bit.
Yeah. So how does this compare when you look at the TeamPCP attacks and the UNC or even this drift attack? How do they compare to a decade ago? When you
so I was intimately involved and aware of the SolarWinds hack from more than 10 years ago, right? And there it was different. We detected the hack downstream from the actual vendor from SolarWinds. And we worked with SolarWinds to kind of help them remediate. And so really what allowed us to find that particular hack was a VPN request, right? It was someone trying to register a device on our VPN. It was not something that happened on the machine itself that made that command and control callback, right? So from a sophistication standpoint, and the reason we couldn't detect it on the endpoint was because of the level of sophistication that went into developing that software, that malicious software, right? Within SolarWinds, everything was signed. It did not look any different from what SolarWinds would have done, and so from our standpoint, at least if you kind of compare that hack versus what we see with the Axios one, I'd say the SolarWinds was a lot more sophisticated, and this happened 10 years ago. Right. I think what is different about the Axios one is how they went about it, how coordinated they were in trying to compromise that one developer. And I think that's what stands out, not so much the actual injection itself, right?
Yeah, it's interesting, right, BJ? Because the credentials, SolarWinds 1, 2, 3, by that intern were far easier to get, where on one hand, the sophistication of injecting the code was far more sophisticated. And on this side, it was far more sophisticated.
Exactly.
And trust on the upfront. But once you're in,
Yeah, exactly. Right. So it kind of, we've come across a lot of threat actors over the years. I'd put these guys sort of in the middle of the pack. But that's not to say they're not sophisticated, right? The fact that they put in so much effort to kind of target that one developer, I think, goes to say how much resources they have, right? And they didn't stop at that one developer, right? Over the weekend, we found out they targeted a whole bunch of other developers. So now imagine doing that at scale across a number of different OSS communities. It's going to be a problem, I would say.
Yeah.
Right.
Do we have to, just do your speculation, because you dealt with such high-level nation-state actors, BJ. In your estimation, and maybe a silly question, we're in a geopolitical battle right now in the Middle East.
Yep.
Are Iran and going to leverage quote unquote allies like North Korea? Are we going to see potentially more of this? Are we going to see it exponential? Potentially, and is that potentially why we're seeing it as well?
Absolutely, right. I think it's not just the US. You're going to see that more widespread across the Middle East as well, right? They're going to target, they're targeting countries in the Middle East already, using drones and such. But I think cyber attacks is going to scale up as well. Now, what the impact is to us, I think that's going to be difficult to say. But I would say I think there's at least the breadth of attacks is going to definitely increase. Right?
Yeah, for sure.
I think that's something we want to be on top of.
So one thing I want to get your take on is, now that you've spent a few years in the MSP industry, is MSPs are, and there's a lot of them on here that do a phenomenal job elevating, right, to their getting deeper in their security chops, BJ. They're being, becoming great VCIOs, like I mentioned Eric Sun on here and others. They have to be compliance advisors, helping with AI governance, all doing this, right, typically without additional headcount, trying to increase margin at the same time. From where you sit, watching the hundreds of MSPs that you do, navigating this, what do you feel separates the ones that are are able to, get into the executive room, become seen as a leader, right?
Yeah.
And actually be in those executive level conversations.
Yeah, I think where MSPs do well is when they have those conversations versus trying to deal with the technical problems, right? I would say partner with companies that solve the problems for you, that provide you that technical expertise, that are your SOC for the most part. And your time is better spent kind of having those conversations with execs, right? Versus you kind of sitting down on your computer trying to deal with the next alert that comes through from your tooling, right? Outsource that part and kind of spend time selling and having those conversations with executives versus dealing with the technology, right? So partner with companies, no matter who that company is, right? Obviously, I'll tout us, but platforms or unified solutions that kind of give you that breadth of tooling, that breadth of visibility, that enterprise level visibility, that is able to work with you to deal with the issues. So you're not spending time doing it yourself, just having those conversations, right? I'd say I think MSPs that do that are kind of better positioned. So.
Yeah, for sure. I agree. I think if you can get into that conversation, VJ, again, what's in, we'll use a Gary Pica quote, famous Gary Pica quote. No one really cares what's in the chocolate cake. They just want a really good chocolate cake.
Yeah.
So, focus on delivering, what the outcome of that business is really trying to achieve. That they want to have that conversation.
Exactly.
Right.
I'm going to reuse that, by the way, Andrew.
It's I think it's in its we're in our second decade of using that term, and it never gets old, and it is really true.
Always relevant. Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, no one I think most of us, right? If you think about your buying experience, right? You go to see a doctor, right? BJ, you don't want to know that he's using a number 2 scalpel, that he just sterilized his hands with this kind of stuff, that, by the way, the nurse is reading a phishing, notification while they're but my point is you want a good outcome.
Yeah.
Right. And have the outcome conversation of what a business is trying to accomplish. I think you're going to have a lot better results.
Absolutely.
But how about one final question here on the last minute, VJ? And that is, how long, a lot of times, I'm just going to take a moment and talk about things going. Just a quick riff here on Corey Clark and the SonicWall team. He did a really good job. They put out what they call the Protect Report versus another threat report. And one of the things that I saw was the amount of time still for patching.
Mm-hmm.
Because we've really seen this year as the identity and edge, right, attack surface. In your perspective in the years doing this, has much changed? Like, are we still like, hey, don't patch, we got to keep the business going, or don't patch because getting back to the conversation of we've got no policy and process in place to tie it to critical business systems, that why we do need to take this.
Yeah.
Has much changed in that area in the time you've been doing this?
I feel like a lot of patching has kind of become a compliance-driven thing versus a risk issue, right? I've seen companies kind of prioritize patches because their tooling has exposed that as an issue, not because it is an actual issue, right? So, for example, right, if you look at if you look at our current state, right, the kinds of issues that lead to bad guys getting in are, to your point, like these edge devices, the FortiGate vulnerability, or a sonic wall, if it happened to be, if it happened to have one, versus your Windows update is not up to par, right? You're missing a patch from 2 months ago, right? That is, I'd say, less relevant to keeping secure versus making sure your firewalls are patched, making sure like those entry points are patched. And so I think where I'm seeing industry, especially true of the MSP world, our companies are mainly being driven by compliance at this point and focusing on patching based on what their compliance tooling has told them versus what the actual risk is, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that has to change some. And until that happens, I think we're going to continue to see issues.
Yeah, really well said. I love it. So Vijay, thanks. And first off, thank you all out there for dealing with a little bit of technical issues. I will do my best to get it resolved between now and next Monday. Vijay, thank you for coming on and sharing your expertise on a subject. Like I said, I really wanted you here to talk about based on your background and your knowledge. It was phenomenal. So really,
always a pleasure.
Yeah, likewise, my friend. Be healthy, be safe. Everybody have a wonderful day out there. Take care.
Take care.